I'm filming.
Oh, you're filming?
Well, I don't, yeah.
Okay. So if you remember last December and early this year in January, that there was this massive government shutdown, and it was the longest in US history. And during that time, there was a lot of articles that came out about how the government workers had to work without pay, or they were without a job for several weeks on end. And that this put a lot of strain on these government employees. And eventually it got to the point where these government workers, they found that they were living paycheck to paycheck. And news organizations started asking a broader question. How many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck? And there were several that came out with a consensus. One was CNBC stated out that 78% of employed Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. That's 4 in 5 Americans. So my purpose here today is to ask, why is this the case? Why are so many people living this way of life? Is it a choice, or are they forced to? But why should you listen to me about this? Well, I'm actually one of the lucky few Americans to not live paycheck to paycheck. I budget monthly, and I'm fortunate enough to not have to worry about when my next paycheck is coming in. And I have to ask the audience here, are you among the Americans that are living paycheck to paycheck? And if you aren't, you probably know someone that is, or are family members with someone that is living paycheck to paycheck. And there's so many Americans that are living this style of life because of their economic situations. That's because of high debt, they're not financially literate, and there's so many Americans that have higher expenses now and stagnating wages. So Americans are in tons of debt, and this type of debt can come in the forms of credit cards, student loans, mortgages, that sort of thing, and the list can go on, and Americans can and are in debt for it. And there was this survey that was put out by Nitro College of 1,000 people, and they found that among baby boomers, millennials, and Generation X, 80% of those generations are in debt. Now, debt doesn't go away. You have to make monthly payments on this debt, or else you'll face serious repercussions. And collectively, Americans owe a consumer debt as high as $13 trillion. To put it in perspective, our national GDP is 19 trillion. So debt is a major factor to consider when talking about why Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. But why are they in debt? Well, maybe it's because they aren't financially literate. So financial literacy is understanding how to properly budget and manage your personal finances, as well as understanding more broader economic concepts, such as compound interest and inflation. So this is important for several reasons, but I want to get into more compound interest. So compound interest, when I was talking about those debts, the higher debts you have, the more they grow because of compound interest, and the harder it is to pay off. However, compound interest could be working for the American people in order to grow their savings in retirement funds through investing. So compound interest is a double-edged sword that Americans don't know how to properly use. There's this article by the Tennessean, and they found that only 57% of Americans are financially literate. And they compared it to Botswana. And they found that Botswana, with a much smaller population and a much smaller economy in terms of GDP, it's 1,000 times smaller, we're only just beating them in terms of financial literacy rates. And that's crazy to think about. But now we have to ask ourselves, does financial literacy cause people to go into debt? And I don't know if I can prove causation to you right now, but my interpretation, and I hope yours is as well, is that financial literacy, or the lack thereof, as well as high debts, cause people to be more likely to go and live paycheck to paycheck. They're both major factors when considering the reason why. But there's a third that I haven't yet discussed, and that is household expenses have gone up while wages have stagnated in recent years. So household expenses have gone up. That's housing costs and tuition costs. I'm sure that most of you have heard in the news over the past few years that housing and tuition has gotten more and more expensive, and it's gotten less affordable for the American people. That's affecting mortgages, rents, and education. Wage stagnation is another big concern because wages are not growing fast enough to actually grow. Let me give you a hypothetical situation to understand. Let's say you get a 3% raise this year and you think, great, that's awesome. But because of inflation, and the inflation rate is at 5%, your wage has actually shrunk by 2%. You are worse off this year than you were the previous. Now, this situation is exaggerated, but it points out the major concern with wage stagnation, and that is wages are not growing if it's only keeping up with inflation. And so the American people, there's so many Americans that are in high debt, they're not financially literate, and they have had to deal with higher expenses and stagnating wages, and it's causing so many to live paycheck to paycheck. And these are just a couple of the factors that concerns why people are living this lifestyle and why our society has gotten to the point that it has. There's this old adage that I want to talk about when it comes to this type of situation, and that is to work smarter and not harder. I think that hard work is valuable, and there is worth in hard work, and there's a sense of pride to be brought about from it. But I value smarter work more because it saves me time and energy. It saves me money and stress. I don't have to worry about my next paycheck, and because of that, I'm able to build my savings and pay for college out of pocket. But I am one of the few lucky Americans to do that. And I think that we should be able to expand this opportunity to all Americans. We live in a country that holds itself up as this land of opportunity, and it feels like there's so many of us that are disadvantaged. Maybe we should do something about that. Thank you.